This is your host, Danny, and this is Business from English Plus Podcast. Welcome to this new business episode, and as I promised in Season 3, our business episodes are going to be different. They're going to be different in two main ways. The first thing, this is the first episode in a long series that will make up a full course that you can take. You can start from this episode and then we will continue with other topics. Today's episode is going to be about management. But let me tell you a little bit about other topics we are going to talk about throughout this whole course. We're going to talk about management first. We're going to talk about company structure, recruitment, women in business, among other topics, of course. Then we will move on to talk about production, logistics, quality, then marketing, advertising, then finance. We'll talk about banking, venture capital, stocks and shares. And finally, we will talk about economics. We will talk about government and taxation, the business cycle, exchange rates, international trade, and more. There are a lot of topics that you need to know if you're interested in business. And again, let me tell you, this is not going to be just business English where we're going to learn some words and expressions. This is how I used to do it. Things are going to change. And that brings me to the second major change in our business episodes. In our business episodes from now on, it's not going to be just me talking about what this is and what that is, etc. I will be asking for your input a lot. We will have discussions, and you might ask yourselves, how can we discuss something? And in the podcast, you're just talking, it's just an audio file, I'm listening to it. That's right. And that's why I created a classroom on Google Classrooms. Of course, I will leave the link in the description of the episode and in the post on the website. There, you will have all the discussion questions that I will mention in the podcast, but then you can go there and discuss. Give me your opinions. You can discuss with other students as well. Share your opinions to make this whole business course a little bit more like a live course. It's not just you get information from Danny. Yeah, that's very useful. That's very good, but that's not enough. We need to discuss more. So you will find out that in some parts of this episode, I'm going to ask questions and I'm going to ask you to take the link, go to Google Classrooms and share in the discussion. Well, you might say, why didn't you do that on other platforms? Because Google platform is a safe platform and is a platform that is designed for learning, for education. And this is what English Plus is all about. I had the idea to include that on social media, but to be honest, social media has a different vibe. So to recap, our business course that we are going to start today is going to be different in two ways. We're going to have topics, and these topics are organized in a way that will make up a full course at the end of about 28 chapters that we're going to have. So 28 weeks to come. We're going to talk about a different topic every time. And the second important thing is that you will be part of it. And you can share what you learn on this classroom I created on Google Classrooms. And before we start, let me remind you again that you can find all the links you need to Google Classroom, to the post that I created for this episode on my website, and of course, to my Patreon page where you can support me to create more of this content. The more support I get, the more ideas I will have, and the more freedom I will have to include more things where we can interact with each other and learn more, enrich our knowledge, and hopefully our lives as well. Now, with that being said, let's start with today's episode, the very first episode in our business course, Chapter 1, Management. Now, let me start with a couple of questions I want you to think about. And of course, you can go to Google Classroom and answer those questions, and we can continue the discussion there. When you think about management, to what extent is effective management something you are born with as opposed to a set of skills that can be taught? Now, some people go with the idea that managers are born with managerial skills. These are natural leaders. And some other people disagree and think that these things can be learned. You can be taught to become a good manager, a good leader. Where do you stand in this discussion and why? That is my first question, but that's not everything. I have another question for you. Which business leaders do you admire for their managerial skills, and what are these skills? Now, you might have an idol, or you might have not idols, but managers you really like, you really admire. But why do you admire them? Just because of the clothes they wear, or because of certain skills they have, or certain ways they use in management, certain tactics, certain strategies? If you know about some people, they don't have to be famous, by the way. You can talk about people who are not that famous. All the fame they need is that you know them. If you know them, they are famous. That's enough. But the more important thing, it's not the name or the prestige level. The more important thing is, why do you think these business leaders are special? Why do you admire them? What are these skills that they have, the techniques, the strategies, etc., that make them great business leaders, in your opinion? And the next question that I would like you to think about, do managers have a good reputation in your country? In general, I'm saying. Or are they made fun of in jokes, cartoons, and television series? If so, why do you think this is? And here, I would like to say that if you would like to talk about this, I don't want you to give me names, because after all, we need to make this discussion clean. We don't want to use this discussion to defame people or something like that. Let's keep it in general. Unless you are praising someone, nobody is going to be angry or upset from any kind of praise they may get. And now the fourth question I'm going to ask you is going to be based on some managers that I chose for you to think about. You might know them, you might not. So if you don't know these managers, I will introduce them briefly, of course. But if you don't know these managers, you can look them up and learn more about them if you want. These are 5 very famous managers, and I'm going to tell you about them. The first one is Akio Morita, Jack Welch, Steve Jobs, Meg Whitman, and Carlos Ghosn. Now, when it comes to Carlos Ghosn, I know that some people might say that there's a scandal about this man and there's a lawsuit in Japan. With all due respect, we're just talking about their managerial skills. Because what if one of these people that I talked about, except for Steve Jobs, who's dead, take part in a scandal after I release this podcast? Should I just change the podcast? Not really, because this is business. We're not talking about law here. We're not with or against any lawsuit. There are judges and attorneys who can decide that. That's not our job. But I will introduce these 5 people to you. I don't know if you know them well or you don't. As I told you, if you don't know these people really well and you would like to learn more about them, you can look them up. I will start with Akio Morita. Akio Morita co-founded a company in Tokyo in 1946 and later changed its name to Sony. Now you know who Akio Morita is, right? Maybe you didn't know Akio Morita, but when I said he changed the name to Sony, everybody knows Sony. Then he moved to the United States, where he had the original ideas for the Walkman and the video cassette recorder. Sony acquired music and film companies and developed video games. Everybody knows Sony. Everybody knows the Walkman. Maybe you don't know the Walkman, depending on how old you are, but I'm pretty sure you've heard of it. Back in the day, it was a sensation for over a decade. But anyway, Sony now, we're talking about PlayStation, we're talking about music companies, film companies, video games, a very big company indeed. And of course, their appliances, their TVs, and other appliances. Akio Morita co-founded this company in Tokyo in 1946, and we have Sony today. So that is our first manager. The second one is Jack Welch. Jack Welch was Chief Executive Officer, or CEO, of General Electric. So, now you might not know the man, but you know General Electric. He was the CEO of General Electric in the 1980s and 1990s. Its market value increased from $14 billion to more than $410 billion. But there is something about this man that he fired 10% of the company's managers each year. So that is our second manager. The third manager, I'm pretty sure that everybody's heard of Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs was first the co-founder and later the CEO of Apple. He was fired from his own company in 1985 and co-founded Pixar Animation Studios, but rejoined Apple in 1997 and helped develop the iPod and the iPhone. A brilliant man, and maybe the most famous of the 5 managers, because he died not a long time ago and they made 2 movies about his life. And of course, you're talking about Apple. Apple is a global brand, is recognized everywhere around the globe, and his name is closely related to this brand. But anyway, he's just one of these managers, and it is up to you to decide which one is the best manager in your opinion, but the most important thing is why. But these are not all the managers. We still have 2 to think about. And that brings me to the 4th manager I'm going to talk about. That is Meg Whitman. In 1998, Meg Whitman joined a startup company called eBay in Silicon Valley as president and CEO. She resigned 10 years later when it was a hugely successful business planning to run for governor of California. So you might not know Meg Whitman, but you definitely know eBay, right? And finally, we have Carlos Ghosn. He was born in Brazil, but a French and Lebanese citizen, became the CEO of the Nissan car company in 2001. In 2005, he also became CEO of Renault. At Nissan, he converted huge debts into huge profits. Now, my question to you is, which of the 5 famous managers that I just mentioned do you find the most interesting and impressive? And please, here, I want you to think about reasons why. And reasons why that have to do with their managerial skills, not just their fame or their companies. I don't want you to choose Akio Morita just because you love Sony PlayStation, or choose Steve Jobs because you love Apple and iPhone and whatever Apple makes. I'm a big fan of Apple, but I might not find Steve Jobs as the best manager just because of the great products, right? I want you to think about it from a managerial perspective. And remember, all of that is included in our Google Classroom. You have the question right there, but you can use the information I gave you, or you can look up even more information and share the information with us as reasons why you think one of these managers is the best. Out of these 5, of course, it doesn't have to be the best in the world, because there are still other managers who are greatly successful. And here, of course, we cannot forget about Bill Gates and other famous managers. But out of these 5 managers, because I chose these managers because they have different managerial styles. That's why. So that is the trick. I want you to choose one of them and go share your findings or share your ideas on Google Classroom. Again, let me remind you, the link is in the description of the episode. So I hope that serves as an introduction to what we're going to talk about, which is management. And now, to get in the topic a little bit deeper, let's talk about what makes a good manager. That is a big question, right? If I just ask you what makes a good manager, it might be a little bit confusing or too overwhelming, because it is not just one thing. There are a lot of things that make a good manager. And because of that, we're going to listen to 2 accounts coming from 2 people answering this very question. What makes a good manager? And then you can agree with them, you can disagree with them. It's up to you, of course. But I'm going to ask you a couple of questions that have to do with what they said. So listen carefully. And then when I ask you about their ideas, you will need to remember which person said what. So this is kind of like a listening exercise. Yes, this is a course. So we have listening, we have reading, and more importantly, we have discussion. Now let's start listening to Carlo. The first person is Carlo. And you know that I just have 2 voices, right? My voice and Ben's voice. Both of them are me. I just use them to differentiate that these are 2 different people. And unfortunately, I don't have a female voice. And that's the only reason why most of the listenings are going to be men, not women. Just because I don't have a woman's voice. That's all. So for all the women who are listening to me, I'm really sorry. I'm not doing it on purpose, but I only have 2 male voices I can use. My voice and Ben's voice, which is also me,
but a little bit thicker and deeper. That's all.
All right, so let's start listening to Carlo and see what he thinks about this question. What makes a good manager?
So managers should pursue the company goal, maximize value for shareholders and so on. But on the other hand, they should accomplish also the personal goals and objective of the people they manage. For instance, helping young professionals to develop and understanding the expectation of everybody in their team and trying to match goals of the company and even helping people to develop in their team.
So that was the first, that was Carlo. The second one is John. So remember, the first one is Carlo, the second one is John, because I'm going to ask you questions and you will need to know whether these are John's ideas or Carlo's ideas. Now let's hear what John thinks of the question, what makes a good manager?
I believe that good managers actually don't manage everybody. And good managers, basically, they're good executors of strategies, because the companies today, those ones who are successful, are not those who have lots of business plans and strategies somewhere in the reports and files, but those companies who have managers, executors of plans. So basically, in order to be a good manager, you have to know how to lead people, how to motivate people, and how to make sure that you are meeting your targets.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Looking to enhance your English skills while exploring a world of knowledge? Then English Plus Podcast website is just for you. Dive into diverse topics ranging from science to literature, history to business, and myths to modern insights. Each episode from our podcast or article from our magazine is a journey of learning and discovery, designed to not only improve your language skills, but also broaden your understanding of the world. Join us at English Plus Podcast, where language meets limitless learning. Tune in today and take your English to the next level. Visit EnglishPlusPodcast.com to start your journey. English Plus Podcast, language, learning, enlightenment. Never stop learning with English Plus. So, that was John. And now it's my turn and your turn. I hope you listened carefully. If you haven't, you can replay this part, listen again carefully, because now I'm going to ask you questions and you will need to tell whether Carlo thought this way or John or maybe both. So let me start with the very first one. A good manager should follow the company's goals. Who said that? Was it Carlo or John? Think about it. Well, this first one was Carlo's, when he said, simply, managers should pursue the company goal. Now, for the next one, a good manager should help subordinates to accomplish their own goals and objectives. Again, who said that? Was it Carlo or John, or both? Well, it was Carlo again, because Carlo said, on the other hand, they should accomplish also the personal goals and objective of the people they manage. All right, I hope you're getting the answers right. Now let's move to the next one. A good manager should help young colleagues to develop. Who said that? Was it Carlo, John, or both? Well, one more time, it was Carlo who said that. He said, for instance, helping young professionals to develop and understanding the expectation of everybody in their team. And now the next one. A good manager should know how to lead people. Who said that? Was it Carlo, John, or both? Well, actually, both of them mentioned that. Carlo, not directly, but all of that by helping young professionals develop, understanding the expectations, trying to match goals of the company, it said all of that is leadership. And for John, he said that specifically by saying, in order to be a good manager, you have to know how to lead people. So both of them agreed on this point, that a good manager should know how to lead people. How about the next one? A good manager should know how to motivate people. Who mentioned that? Was it Carlo, John, or both? Well, this time it was John only. Because when John said, in order to be a good manager, you have to know how to lead people, how to motivate people, and how to make sure that you are meeting your targets. So that was John. Now the next one. A good manager should make a maximum profit for the owners or the shareholders. Who said that? Well, this time it was John, and he said it right at the beginning. He said, a good manager should pursue the company goal, maximize value for shareholders, and so on. So obviously, according to Carlo, a good manager should make a maximum profit for the owners. Now the next one. A good manager should meet the targets they have been set. Who said that? Well, this one was John's idea, because he talked about good managers who are good executors of plans, and they need to make sure that they are meeting their targets. So that was what John said. The last one, a good manager should successfully execute plans and strategies. Who said that? Well, you don't need to think twice about that because I said it a couple of times. It's John again. That's what John said about good managers. So let me recap here. And here, it's not about John or Carlo anymore. We have 8 different ideas about what makes a good manager. And the question is to you now. And that's also another discussion question you will find in Google Classroom. But here are just some ideas. And of course, you can come up with your own ideas. I'm not limiting you to these 8 ideas alone. But just to help you think and help you come up with ideas, the question, what makes a good manager? Now, a good manager should follow the company's goals. You might agree with some of them, you might agree with all of them, but you might think some of them are more important than others. It's up to you. That's for you to decide. That is a discussion point. So what makes a good manager? Now, here from those 2 listenings that we had, we know that a good manager should follow the company's goals, should help subordinates to accomplish their own goals and objectives, should help young colleagues to develop, should know how to lead people, should know how to motivate people, should make a maximum profit for the owners or the shareholders, should meet the targets they have been set, and finally should successfully execute plans and strategies. What do you think? What do you think are the 3 most important characteristics of a good manager? You might use some of these ideas, or you might use your own ideas. Are any of these qualities that we just mentioned in the listening, or actually Carlo and John mentioned, are among the 3 most important characteristics of a good manager, or do you have some other ideas in mind? Please join the discussion. You will learn a lot more if you discuss and listen to what other people say. And now it is time to talk more in depth about management. And this is a reading part. So if you're on the website, you can just read it if you want. And of course, because this is a podcast, I'm going to read it to you. So let's imagine that we are reading it together. But by all means, if you prefer to read it on your own, you can skip this part when I'm reading it and you can just go to the website and read it on your own. Then we're going to talk about some words, some ideas from this reading. So what is management? That's coming next. Management is important. The success or failure of companies, public sector institutions and services, not-for-profit organizations, sports teams, and so on often depends on the quality of their managers. But what do managers do? One well-known classification of the tasks of a manager comes from Peter Drucker. Drucker was an American business professor and consultant who is often called things like the father of modern management. Drucker suggested that the work of a manager can be divided into 5 tasks: planning, which means setting objectives, organizing, integrating, which means motivating and communicating, measuring performance, and developing people. First of all, senior managers and directors set objectives and decide how their organization can achieve or accomplish them. This involves developing strategies, plans, and precise tactics and allocating resources of people and money. Secondly, managers organize, they analyze, and classify the activities of the organization and the relations among them. They divide the work into manageable activities and then into individual tasks. They select people to perform these tasks. Thirdly, managers practice the social skills of motivation and communication. They also have to communicate objectives to the people responsible for attaining them. They have to make the people who are responsible for performing individual tasks form teams. They make decisions about pay and promotion, as well as organizing and supervising the work of their subordinates. They have to work with people in other areas and functions. So that is the third of the 5 tasks suggested by Drucker as the work of a manager. Now, fourthly, managers have to measure the performance of their staff to see whether the objectives or targets set for the organization as a whole and for each individual member of it are being achieved. And lastly, managers develop people, both their subordinates and themselves. A company's top managers also have to consider the future and modify or change the organization's objectives when necessary and introduce the innovations that will allow the business to continue. Top managers also have to manage a business's relations with customers, suppliers, distributors, bankers, investors, neighboring communities, public authorities, and so on, as well as deal with any crisis that arises. Although the tasks of a manager can be analyzed and classified in this fashion, management is not entirely scientific. There are management skills that have to be learned, but management is also a human skill. Some people are good at it and others are not. Some people will be unable to put management techniques into practice. Others will have lots of technique but few good ideas. Excellent managers are quite rare. So this last part of this listening or reading, depending on whether you're listening to it or reading it on the website, but this last part is very interesting. Now, of course, coming back to the 5 tasks, these are clear, and these 5 things are the heart of today's lesson, the 5 big tasks of management. But for me, there is a very important question at the end. Do you really agree with this or not? Here, we said that there are management skills that have to be learned, and that is a fact, of course. There are certain things that you can learn, but management is also a human skills. Management is not entirely scientific. It is not 1 + 1 = 2. A lot of the time, 1 + 1 = 5, 6, 7, or even sometimes 0, because it depends on the human who applies these techniques to real life. And you're not applying these techniques to machines, so everything is clear. You're using these techniques and you're applying them to other humans. So it's very complicated and it is not always the same. You cannot play by the book all the times. Well, some tricks you can play by the book and it's fine. You can get by doing a couple of things, but a lot of the time you have to consider the people you're working with. You have to consider the people you're trying to sell. You have to consider your community in general, because your business is based on people. People who are working for you and people who you're working for, your customers. So, what do you think about that? What are your thoughts about that? And by the way, you'll also find this in the Google Classroom. I know that I mentioned Google Classroom like 1,000 times in this episode, but I need to do this because this is a new thing, and I really want you to go there and share. This is a way that we can have something like class practice or group work. You see, I can't do group work on the podcast alone. We need to have a place, and I insist, a safe place, because this is a place not to bully each other. This is a place not to talk badly about each other or to be silly, because this is not a silly topic, and I'm not a big fan of just talking about silly stuff, unless we choose to, right? But this is serious stuff. This is a place where we need to respect each other, and I will make sure we keep it this way. But anyway, I have a lot of confidence in you, in my listeners, because I know you wouldn't be here if you're after other stuff. Anyway, that is about Google Classroom. But let's get back to what is management, because that is exactly what we're talking about. Let me talk about a couple of words we had in the text that I would like you to learn more about them. There's the word consultant. The consultant is a person who provides expert advice to a company. And there's also the word crisis, and that means a situation of danger or difficulty. There's also innovation. Innovation is a new idea or method. There is the objective, and the objective here is a noun, of course, and that means something you plan to do or achieve. And then we have promotion, and that is when someone is raised to a higher or more important position. And we have the public sector. We mentioned the public sector. What is that? That is the section of the economy under government control. Then we talked about strategy. There was the word strategy, and that means a plan for achieving success. But the strategy is a little bit bigger than an objective. It is the big umbrella within which we have tactics, we have certain objectives, we have tasks, etc. And the final word I would like you to learn from this text is subordinate. And subordinate means a person with a less important position in an organization. And pay attention, a person with a less important position, not a less important person. This person might be a lot better than you and a lot better than anybody else in the company, but the position is less important. So keep that in mind. You have to treat these people with respect. You have to treat your subordinates with respect if you want to be a good manager. Now, these are the words, and you might think to yourselves that I'm not spelling the words just like I do with word power, etc. Because first of all, this is not word power. And the second thing, all of these exercises are on the website. If you just go to the website, the custom post, the link is in the description. You can go to the website and do all of these while you can see them and listen at the same time. So I got you covered, guys. And that brings me to the next thing. You will find an exercise where I will ask you to use some of the knowledge we learned from this text and also you will find it on the website. And that brings me to the final audio part of this episode, because remember, on the website there are a lot more things to do, and in Google Classroom, especially made for this series, for this business series, there are a lot of other things you can do. And one of these things is the case study. We're going to select a chief operating officer. There are 3 companies who are looking for a chief operating officer. Now, for this case study, I'm afraid it's going to be premium. I'm only going to send this case study to my patrons for a big reason that the answer to this case study might be very big, and I cannot promise that I have time to answer everybody. But I promise you that everything else in Google Classroom that is available to everybody will be so beneficial and has a lot of value to you. That brings me to the end of today's episode. We talked about business management, and we will learn a lot if we join the discussion. Don't forget that you have all the links you need in the description of this episode, a link that will take you to the post that I have on my website, EnglishPlusPodcast.com. There you will find everything you need to read, to do some exercises, and there's another link that will take you to the special classroom I created on Google Classroom, and there you can discuss some of the ideas here. And of course, there's the case study that is exclusive to my patrons. So, with that being said, I hope that you find this new format, new business format, useful and good for those who are really interested in learning more about business. And don't forget, you can become a patron on Patreon. The link is in the description. Go to my Patreon page and you will have a lot of perks like this one today. The case study is exclusive to you, my patrons. And that brings me to the end of this episode. Thank you very much for listening to another episode from English Plus Podcast. This is your host, Danny. I will see you next time.